Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This is our second video in starting an emergency garden. And not because we're going to run out of food, but because of the healthcare crisis. A lot of us are home, we're concerned about what's going on, and a lot of people have become interested in gardening. So this whole series is about doing it on a budget. I don't want you to go spend a lot of money because you're worried. I want you to kind of come here and learn a new skill. And what we started about a week ago were the cool weather crops. I will link the video to show you how to do that, but we're doing this without grow lights, so it's inexpensive. And this is what we planted last week, and they're starting to sprout up, and they're all coming up. In about another week or so, they should all be sprouted. In about 2 weeks, they're going to look like the leafy greens, same thing right over here, and they're going to be ready to go out into the garden. So today I want to show you a couple options of where you can plant these on a budget. I'll show you the least expensive way, give you enough information to get started, and hopefully you'll find that you enjoy gardening and you're picking up a new hobby. But we're going to do this on a budget, and we're going to figure out, or actually I'm not going to figure out, I'm going to show you just different options for planting your leafy greens out in the garden and keeping it on the cheap. So this is my main garden. It's large. I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't want you to be overwhelmed. This is not what you need to do. My garden is broken up into teaching areas, so there's a lot of different options that you can look at and consider for your garden. We're going to start with the cheapest option first, and we're going to look at earth beds, things that are planted in the ground, and then we'll get to containers. And then after that, I'll talk about some garden fertilizers and different products that you're going to need. The earth bed. Digging in the ground is the cheapest way. It's effective. This is one of my favorite beds. And basically, it's already planted with the cool weather crops. This will be something that you'll be doing. You just trench out and pile the dirt into the middle. You create a mound. These are about 3 feet wide. That's what I recommend. And you can make them as long as you want. If you're digging in an area that has green grass and other things growing on it, you're really not, for the first year, going to need to put a lot of fertilizers in there. So you don't have to worry about setting the soil up perfectly. You already have earth that's going to grow your plants. Over the year, beginning of the next year, you can worry more about amendments and fertilizers and things that are a little more complicated. I'm going to talk to you about water-soluble fertilizer at the end and what you need to buy. So you just trench out. I will link the video that shows you how to set this up in full. And I actually grew a hedge of tomatoes in here. But you just trench it out, put the dirt in the middle, pull out any grass or weeds or anything like that, throw them to the side. You want this to be mostly dirt, and this will really work. This is about 3 feet wide. You can see all the plants that I've put into there. And this is the cheapest way and the best way to get started, just using the earth around your area. We can amend this with peat moss. I'll show you that in a little bit. That's a cheap way to buy a non-nutritional organic matter. So basically it doesn't feed your plants, but peat moss is finely shredded up, finely ground. It adds in some nice fluff. It holds water and moisture, and it helps kind of set your soil up for just a better growing area. When you're picking an area, you want 6 or 8 hours of full sun, the direct sunlight coming in, and you want a place that drains pretty well. Those are the two most important things. You don't want sitting water, and you can't grow in shade. So that's the earth bed. The next thing that you can build are more of these framed beds. They're kind of raised beds. Raised beds are a little bit taller, 12 inches, 24 inches sides. These are framed beds, and if you want to do something like this, you want to keep them 4 feet wide. And the reason for that is that your arms are 2 feet, and you can walk around, reach in from any side, and tend to your garden. You can fill this with different products. You can take earth from different parts of your yard, fill it up. And the sides for the framed beds are anywhere from 4 inches to 6 inches. That just allows you to concentrate all your resources into one space, and you have a nice growing area. This is probably 4 feet by 6 feet. This is all you really need to get started and to grow all the greens that I'm showing you. So you don't have to create anything massive like this. I have different trellises up for growing vertically. When I do the warm weather crops, cucumbers, beans in this series, we'll talk more about that. Another way that's a little bit more expensive is to grow vertically. And I have a couple of towers there. These are green stalk towers, and I am affiliated with them. If you want to buy them, you can find a link in the video description. But I just wanted to go over what they are. You can find different setups at different places. It's basically soil in containers that stack on each other, and you can go up to about 5 tiers. If you get really past that, the wind can be an issue and knock them over. But you can see that in this space I already have about 30 to 40 plants growing of the different greens. So if you're growing on a balcony or in a small space, growing vertically is a great way to do it. And basically that's what's in there is just a potting mix from a store. You can make it more cheaply. I'll link some videos on that. But it might be hard right now getting out to the stores and getting all the products you need. But you can absolutely grow vertically. Let me show you a raised bed with some higher edges, and then we'll talk about containers. So these are raised beds that I just built. I'm going to be filling, and on the bottom I put about 1 inch of shredded wood and leaves, and then on top of that I'll be putting my earth, and they're 12 inches tall. Raised beds would be used for if you have an area that maybe you have rocky soil, the drainage isn't so great. You can build the frame beds and build it with 10 inch, 12 inch sides or taller, and they drain really well. It would put you over any kind of rocky soil or drainage problems. And these are actually 2 feet by 6 feet, and a couple of these would be perfect for growing greens. When we get over to the containers, there's different options. That's a 22-gallon container. Anytime you use a container, you want to make sure holes are in it. We'll talk about what you fill them up with in a little bit. You can grow lots of greens in there. We'll walk back to where I'm growing some. These are sunken containers. These are just containers that I got from neighbors that had nursery plants brought in. I cut out the bottoms, sink them in the ground, and it's just a nice way to line up what you're growing. You can concentrate resources right into the middle of the containers, fill the containers. It saves you some money, and the plants do really well. They take what you put into the pot, the roots go into the ground, they do really, really well. Here's an example real quick while we're here of a raised bed. Right in here I have a lot of the greens growing that were seed starting, if you want a little preview, and they're all doing really well. Here's another raised bed with greens, very similar to what we're growing. This one's not covered. In future videos I'll talk about managing pests and disease and problems like that, but they're all doing well. And here are the other containers. You can grow your greens in flower boxes. You want them to be about 6 inches in depth. You can get away with 4 inches. Those are cool weather crops sprouting up in there right now, but we could transplant right into those. So you could just do rows of flower boxes and plant all of your leafy greens. And these are all cool weather crops. Some of them overwintered, some of them were just planted. There's a peas coming up in there, but you can set up a space just like this. Okay, so let's talk about fertilizers and what you might fill them with. All right, let's talk about fertilizers, then we'll talk about ways to fill your containers and amend your beds in the cheapest way possible. So you have 2 types of fertilizers basically. You have the insoluble type, which is what we're looking at now. That means they're in a form of N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that your plant can't use until soil biology slowly breaks down the fertilizers into a form of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium your plants can use. These are typically slow-release fertilizers. You might see bone meal, you might see blood meal, and you're going to see a lot of bags that have different names on it. They might say for tomatoes or peppers or greens. This one says raised bed plant food. Don't worry about that. Most of the products are the same. They come in a granular form. You sprinkle them in the ground. Microbiology slowly breaks them down, gives nutrients to your plants. We're going to skip those for now. I have plenty of videos on this. I'll talk more about it in future videos. But to set up your leafy greens garden, they really will do well with the water-soluble type. Water-soluble types of fertilizers means that the N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are immediately ready for your plant to absorb through the roots or through the leaves. There's all kinds of different products. You have your organics, which are on this side, Organic products are wonderful. They're more expensive and you don't get as much bang for your buck. You have the chemical type fertilizers, which sometimes get a bad rap, and rightly so if you use and abuse the chemical fertilizers over and over and over again. But for growing in containers or for giving your leafy greens a boost, they're perfectly fine. This is a Miracle-Gro product, a chemical fertilizer type, and it has a really high nitrogen ratio. So if you buy the chemical types, they're less expensive, and I recommend using them at a quarter strength or a half strength. So they're really, really budget friendly, and they work. They won't hurt your plants. They won't hurt you. The problem with the organic fertilizer, the problem with the chemical fertilizers, is they don't feed soil life, and they can harm soil life after a long period of use. The organic fertilizers feed your plants, they feed your soil life, everybody's happy. They're more expensive, but you can buy different kinds. I like using fish emulsion. The fish emulsion has an NPK ratio of, that's a 5-1-1, 5 nitrogen, 1 phosphorus, 1 potassium, perfect for your leafy greens. And you can really pick out whatever water-soluble fertilizer you want. The organic types there, or if you need to, the chemical type fertilizers. They're both going to work. I'll show you how to use them when we get to planting and watering them in. All right, let's get to the containers and the earth beds and some products that you can use to make the soil better. So here's another garden area that I use on my other channel in a video series. I'll link that if you want to learn a little bit more about setting up your first garden like this and about bagged soil products. That's what I want to talk about. The most expensive way to fill your beds like these or your containers is to buy the bagged products. They work. So for instance, you can get potting mix. That's great for containers. Usually has a fertilizer in it, but it's really expensive to fill a lot of containers that way. Those bags in blue can be anywhere from $8 to $14 depending on the product and the size of the bag. There's a product called Garden Soil, and again, I'll link a video that explains these bag products more. So a product called Garden Soil, they're anywhere from $6 to $8 a bag. Sometimes they have fertilizer in it, but if you were buying it by the bag, it can cost you $60, $80, $100 to fill a bed like this size. So the cheapest way to do it is if you have great soil, just use your earth. A lot of times our earth is a little bit heavy. That would be anything we get from our yard area. Couple things you can do is if you have lots of leaves, get a lawnmower, shred them up really finely, mix in about a third worth of leaves into your earth around the area, and that will loosen it up, put in organic matter, and that's a good way to fill beds to start. If you don't have that, I recommend a simple recipe that we can amend with fertilizers and compost later in the year. And that's just taking 50% earth from wherever you have it in your yard, any source, and mixing it with 50% peat moss. If you don't want to use peat moss, you could use cocoa coir, but that's hard to find. This is a 3-foot bale of peat moss, and it'll cost anywhere from $12 to $14. And it's basically what's used in all of those bagged products over there, except you're paying 3, 4, 5 times more for a bag product than making your own. So it's 50% peat moss, 50% earth. That's perfect for your containers. Plants will grow well in there, and you can do the same thing. 50% peat moss or 1/3 peat moss, the rest earth. Mix it up. It's a great starting base for your garden beds. We can amend them more in the future with composts and other products. That's the cheapest way to set up your beds. I hope this gives you some confidence and some ideas on what you may want to do to grow your seed starts. Thanks for sticking with me through this ridiculous wind. I will link videos into the end screen at the end of this video and in the iCards that are popping up now that help explain these ideas. Next video in this series will be on actually planting the plants into the different beds. Thanks for watching, and please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com.